Okay, I think we are now at the attendee count that I was expecting. So I will say again, welcome everyone to the first of these sort of webinar things I'm trying out. The idea was just take a chance to talk about a place I love, encourage you to think about, whether it should be on your list of places to check out. And to, maybe get you excited about some travel planning after a couple of years of doing less of that. For those who are just joining, as just a reminder, you're not being recorded. I'm recording this so that I can cut it up and repost it later in an archive, but your camera's off, your audio's off, your names aren't being recorded. You can just chill out, hang out, relax, mute me, whatever you'd like to do. So today we are talking about Hanoi. And I'm going to be focused really on the sort of Hanoi experience. We'll talk a little bit about sort of Vietnam in general, but I thought for these webinars, we'd really try and focus on sort of a city or a sort of, fairly narrow area. So the plan for tonight, I'm going to start out talking sort of high level, why you'll love Hanoi, just a few things to get you excited. And then I'll dive into sort of what kind of stuff you'll do if you plan a trip to Hanoi. What's it going to actually look like day to day? What sort of things will you be doing? I'll talk a little bit about the logistics of getting there, getting around, some other things that you might do once you've sort of made the trek to Hanoi. And then I'll wrap things up with question and answer. So there should be a little Q&A widget down here somewhere. And in theory, you can open that and type into it. And then at the end, I'll look at it. I'm going to do my best not to look at it during the first part because I tend to get distracted. So that's our plan. And because this is sort of one-dimensional, I don't have to nervously ask you if you're cool with it because you can't answer me anyways. So let's go. Why are you going to love Hanoi? So there we go. Hanoi is Southeast Asia turned up to 11. It is a multi-sensory experience. I think one of the things I found as I was putting together some slides for this presentation is I kept going through my photos, and I've been to Hanoi a couple times. I've got thousands and thousands of photos. I was going through the photos and I was just getting really frustrated because I didn't feel like any of them captured Hanoi. And then I sort of realized, wait, what is it that I love about Hanoi? It's not necessarily just beautiful sights. It's the sound, it's the smell, it's the heat. It's just the intensity of the place. It is in a way that very few other places I've been are. It is this sort of very intense multi-sensory experience. And that can be a lot. If you haven't had any experience in sort of Southeast Asia, maybe it's not the first place you want to go because you might find that it's just a little too much. But I really think that it is a pretty special place in that regard. And it sort of melds together, both this sort of very modern, dynamic place, historic place, an ancient place, a beautiful place, modern city, natural beauty, et cetera, et cetera. I almost never take video when I travel because, as I imagine most of you have found as well, you take video, you get home, and then what do you do with the video? Like, we're not actually going to edit it into something and do anything with it. And so I almost never take video. But while I was going through my photos, getting ready for this, I did come across one video that I actually thought did a pretty good job of sort of summing up all of this multifaceted nature of Hanoi. And so I'm gonna play the video. I'll mute the audio because it's not particularly interesting. And I just shot this out the window of an Uber or a cab one day. But what you'll see is sort of this combination of, obviously you can see even from the still here, an awful lot of people, an awful lot of scooters and bicycles. But then look at things like the sort of the types of buildings, the types of stores, the sort of activity that's going on in the city. And I'm just gonna play this and mute that. And in theory, I don't know if sharing video via webinars really work, but maybe you're at least getting still images. So obviously, first off, you're seeing there's a lot of stuff going on here. We've got a couple waves of traffic intersecting, and everyone's just sort of going about their business. You've got mopeds, you've got bikes, you've got, brand new cars, you've got cranes in the background, cranes everywhere, construction everywhere. But then you've also got these sort of very old buildings, sort of brutalist things, sort of vaguely Soviet structures around. And then we sort of turn the corner, and well, we've got a South Korean convenience store. We've got boutiques that are selling sort of high fashion. I think somewhere in here, I'm sure you can find a sort of Apple store. You've got a Western style coffee shop. And everything's just sort of mixed together in this one place. And to me, I wish you could sort of feel the fact that it's 110 degrees and it's humid and it's just noise everywhere. But to me, that is really the excitement of Hanoi. It's this sort of thriving, vibrant place. And I am going to just make sure. Okay. Again, this is making puns. And I got distracted by the chat, which I said I wasn't going to do. Okay. Never again. Hanoi is also a super great jumping off point for a lot of sort of adventures within northern Vietnam. It's really the only jumping off point for a lot of these. It's the big city in the north. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some sort of day trips and overnight trips that you can do out of Hanoi that are sort of super doable and get you exposed to places like this. This is Ha Long Bay, which even if you didn't know what it was called, you've almost certainly seen. There have been multiple Bond movies there. It sort of shows up in every demo reel of a fancy new television, those sorts of things. And I'll talk about how to go there and what types of experiences you can have in Ha Long Bay. And then, of course, we've got the food, right? If you sort of forced me, I might say that like Malaysia's food is like a little bit more exciting, but there's something super authentic and amazing about the food in Hanoi in particular. It is sort of, you're always going to be eating on the street. We'll talk about that. And you get a really wide variety of food that is just delicious and flavors that we don't get here, sort of sour and bitter and spicy and all kinds of things. And, you're going to just spend every day having one meal that's better than the last as you work your way through Hanoi. And these are some just bowls of really delicious pho that I wish I was eating right now. So Hanoi, it's urban, it's beautiful, it's vibrant and modern, it's ancient. It's a jumping off point for all kinds of fun activities. And of course, there's amazing food. But what does that actually look like in reality? What are we going to do on our trip to Hanoi? Well, the biggest thing you're going to do, I would encourage you, is to do a lot of walking. Because you might find things like a pug in a window. This is a boutique. This pug lives at the boutique. He hangs out in the window. But really, Hanoi is a city that rewards you for not having too many plans and for just going out exploring. Because as you walk around the city, you're going to see that it is a city that extends upwards. It's multi-level, multifaceted, and then throughout the city, you've got places like beautiful temples and sort of places of respite from the noise and chaos of the city. And you're not going to, have all of these stops necessarily in a guidebook, for example. You're going to find these just by going out and wandering and exploring. And I think Hanoi, more than most other cities, you're not going to go in with a punch list of, I'm going to go to the Colosseum and the Vatican and the, Parthenon and whatever else. You're going to go in saying like, gosh, I want to eat some soup. And I think I want to do an overnight to Ha Long Bay. And there's some museums, but like really what you're going to want to do is go out and walk and explore and make connections with people, hang out, participate in whatever's going on at the time you're there. And Hanoi is just a city that really rewards that. Hanoi, sort of from the westernmost bump out here over to the Red River, this is sort of the core of Hanoi. This is about 4 miles, and the Red River sort of bounds the city. There's really nothing that as a tourist you'd probably go and do on the other side of the Red River. This is about 4 miles, which, you know, again, for you all probably know me, I like to walk. It's very walkable from one end to the other. But the actual sort of most core bit of the core is this smaller bit that's inset here as well. And I'm going to talk about that a little more. And that's an even more walkable and explorable area. I also mentioned there's a large lake up here that is getting into some sort of more modern area where there's a lot of condos going up. It's the kind of lake where you can, you know, go and rent one of those swans that you paddle around and just have a nice day out on a really quite large, beautiful lake as well. But I'm going to be focusing on this area, which is sort of the Hanoi Old Quarter. And it's really the heart of the city, the spiritual heart of the city, the location where the city sort of grows out of, was founded out of. And that is Hoan Kiem Lake. It's a quite small lake, honestly. It has a small little structure in the middle. It's this little gray area here, which is sort of, according to this legend, where Hanoi was founded. It's the sort of, there's a small building there that is the home to an ancient turtle that is connected to the founding of the city. But more importantly, you know, this is the place that everyone in Hanoi is going to gather on weekends, in evenings, on holidays. And this is just a pedestrian party. This is the place that you're probably, if you're doing things right, you're going to be spending every night that you're in Hanoi taking a stroll around the lake, the way the Italians would take a stroll around the main square of the city. And we'll look at some of the activities that you can do there. Up into the north, where it's labeled Hanoi Old Quarter on this map, these are a lot of small twisty streets that they're far more sort of alleys and things than the Google map would indicate. And a lot of these are sort of traditional trading streets. You're going to have sort of Shoe Street and Hat Street and Pot Street and those sorts of things where they're making or selling all of these very, you know, specific wares. This is also sort of, some of the streets up here get into a little bit more like backpackery territory. So if you want to hang out with like Australians and Kiwis, that's the place to go. But I like to stay sort of more to the west of the lake, over around St. Joseph's Cathedral. It's just a little bit more chill. And it's a little more sort of local folks living there. Whereas, you know, up here you get a few more hostels and things like that. And we'll talk about different options for where you might want to stay when you're in Hanoi as we move along here. But, you know, this is, you know, maybe a mile square, probably not even quite a mile square. So you can easily cover all of this area. Also important to note that on certain days and certain times of day, large chunks of this area become pedestrian only, or at least primarily pedestrian only. You're going to always have traffic running on some of the main streets here, but areas around the lake and up into the Old Quarter, for example, on like Friday evenings, you've got big night markets and the streets are mostly shut to traffic. And so, you know, you can just go out and wander. And that's important to know because the traffic's no joke, right? You saw in that video, you've probably seen, you know, things online or in travel videos about navigating in Southeast Asia. I just was, you know, thought I should explicitly mention that the traffic's no joke, and it can be really intimidating for folks. And so I think if you sort of are a little bit prepped for that going in, you at least know that this is a thing you're going to have to tackle. That can be you know, helpful in getting over that initial fear. You've probably heard, you know, folks describe different techniques for getting across a busy street like this. You know, it's important to note a street like this, there's not going to be a traffic light necessarily that cuts off traffic at any point, right? It's going to be a stream of mopeds and bikes and cars like this 24 hours a day, if not substantially more intense. And so the way you get across, at least this is my strategy, you wait until, you know, there's not a moped that's going to hit you as soon as you step off the curb. That's good, step one. And then when you're feeling brave, you're feeling ready, start walking. and walk at a consistent pace in a predictable way. Don't try and sort of stop to let one moped go, or jump ahead quickly to get in front of another one. You walk at a predictable pace. You trust that everyone else is going to take care of themselves, and they're going to make smart predictions about what you're doing, and they'll move around you. And the first time you do it can be a little scary, but once you get comfortable with it, it's actually pretty cool. Makes you feel really good about the fact that like humanity can sort of sort things like this out, and it doesn't just all collapse into chaos. And if you don't feel up for that, you can always just find someone else who's crossing the street and walk behind them. That works really well as well. So don't let that intimidate you. By the second day, you're going to think it's really fun. Other things you're going to see when you're out on the street. Well, Hanoi is a city that lives out on the street. I hope you're starting to get that. That's going to be the refrain here, right? Just everyone's going to be out and about, and life takes place on the street. So as an example, one day we were out walking, and this man, he just pulled up on his moped. That's his moped in the back there, where he'd had all of his barber supplies, including the chair, on his moped, and he was setting up for the day, because that's what he does. This is where his barber shop is. It's on the street. He hangs his mirror up. He's got all his little, I was going to say swords, his scissors for cutting hair. He's got them on the tree, and he cuts hair. And he sort of implied that I might want a haircut. He was correct. I definitely had meant to get a haircut before the trip, and I was, pretty shaggy. And so I said, yeah, heck yeah, let's get a haircut. And it was one of those really fun travel experiences. And again, it's not the kind of thing you would have had on your punch list based on TripAdvisor's top 22 things to do in Hanoi. Get a haircut from a dude. It was just really fun. And he had a little nephew or son, I think it was his nephew, who was there with him, who was very excited because Kat was with me, and she was sitting there. And at the time she had blonde hair. And so the kid was super excited to meet someone with blonde hair and touch her hair, and ask questions about whether all of her family had blonde hair, et cetera. Just one of those great travel memories that really sticks with you. And it happens because, we were out without a plan, just walking the street. And the dude asked if I wanted a haircut, and I said yes. And so that's the kind of thing that I think Hanoi just every day has experiences like that I really, really love. So we've made it this far. But what about the war? I've been doing a lot of thinking about this and getting ready for this webinar. And I kind of suspect that my generation may be the last generation that sort of approaches Vietnam, and especially North Vietnam, with a sort of war-centric perspective. Obviously, certainly folks older than me who had a living memory of the Vietnam War or fought in the Vietnam War, obviously defining moment for many of them. And for folks of my generation, although we were, generally born after the war had, ended, we still had parents who were still unpacking that experience, right? This is the sort of mid 80s or, late 80s. And as someone who sort of comes from that generation and is also sort of a bleeding heart lefty type person, I think there can be a tendency to approach a trip to Vietnam with some amount of sort of, penitence, right? That like, we need to go and sort of hang our heads because we feel bad about this thing that we did, or we expect that everyone who, we meet is going to be really upset with us about the war and about the things that the United States government did in Vietnam. And I think it probably turns some folks off, and I think it certainly shades the experience that folks have who haven't really processed that experience. And certainly for some folks, the war is the point, right? You go and you can do trips that take you to all of these sort of sites from the war and make that connection, and that can be very important for some folks. But I would encourage you to not see Vietnam through that lens, because that is not how Vietnamese folks see Vietnam. As an example, this is Hue Thiep Lake, which is right in the heart of the city. And it's a little tough to see there, but this hunk of metal is a B-52 that was shot down during the war, and it crashed into the lake, and they left it there. And you just sort of stumble upon this. This isn't like a, necessarily a big tourist site or something you would seek out, but it's actually down this really cool alley, and you sort of open up into this plaza with this lake, and there's a B-52 there. But, my memory of this location is like, oh, there's a B-52. But actually over here, you can sort of see this awning. There's this killer coffee shop. And there's a lady there who's making like super pretentious third wave espresso drinks. And she's like 19, right? And that's because most of Vietnam was born after the Vietnam War ended. They're super young. They're super upward focused, upward mobility focused, right? They're working really hard. The GDP has grown incredibly, per capita income has grown. They're experiencing this dramatic improvement in their life experience, and they're looking westward, and they're looking to sort of some of their neighbors. And it is a country that is sort of super dynamic and growing and really excited. And, this lady making snooty coffee drinks is not interested in talking about the war and doesn't really care that you're an American and we're involved in these experiences in Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s, and 80s a little bit. She's excited to talk about coffee, and she's excited that you like her coffee. And I'd say over and over again, that's my experience of Hanoi in general, or Hanoi in specific, and Vietnam in general. But of course, if you want to have that sort of war experience, there are a lot of sites you can check out. And I think I approach these, and I'll talk about these three in particular, as a chance to both, learn history, but also to see my own history reflected through a different lens, right? We approach this from the perspective of the American experience in Vietnam. The sites in Hanoi, very obviously, are going to show you the Vietnamese experience of Vietnam. And I think it's worth noting, right, that Vietnam is a communist country. There is not sort of a free right to expression. And when you're in a sort of major national museum, this is very clearly projecting a particular perspective. And one of the things you'll notice is that, especially in museums that haven't been updated in a while, the content is, certainly of a very particular era, right? Post-war, telling a specific story. So on the left here, you see a photo from the Vietnam Military History Museum, which is a mix of sort of captured war material, as well as some exhibits about sort of conflict in Vietnam. You see a photo at the upper right, that's John McCain. This is from Ho Lo prison, where he was a POW. And you can go and tour that prison and learn about the experience there. And then a photo down at the bottom, this is from the Vietnamese Women's Museum that actually isn't just focused on the war, but has extensive exhibits on sort of Vietnamese women fighting the war. And I think one of the things you come away from, even if you've just hit on these sites and you haven't come in with a ton of Vietnamese history, is that the Vietnam War, or what we would call the Vietnam War, that sort of period of American engagement, is but one moment in 1,000 years of sort of people of conflict in Vietnam. And so, for example, Ho Lo prison, right? This POW camp. Prior to that, it was a French prison, because there was French colonial power there. And most of the museum is not about it as this sort of POW camp. It's about all the horrible things the French did there, right? You're going to hear a lot about the French. The French were, in some ways, sort of more violent and more horrible in the sort of one-to-one torture they performed. But you go back, prior to the French, you've got sort of 1,000 years of being invaded by different countries. And that has, I think, echoed over and over again throughout their history and really influenced the Vietnamese society of today. And so it's not just about sort of the American-centric view that we bring to it. That is but one part of this longer arc of history. And it also, I think, again, you think of modern, thriving Vietnam that's mostly getting along really well with its neighbors. You can sort of draw that line to today is different, and some of that's reflected in how dynamic the society is. And of course, there are lots of awesome museums and those sort of cultural sites that are not just about the war. these are some photos from one of my favorite places in Hanoi, which is their anthropological museum. For those of us growing up in the Midwest, we're certainly aware of sort of the Hmong diaspora in the Midwest, right? But there are many, many small cultural groups in North Vietnam and spilling over the border into the sort of surrounding countries. And this museum sort of takes you through understanding all of those different groups, how they interact, traditional living environments, traditional crafts, their history. Again, shown through a particular lens, but this museum is much more modern and I think is doing a much better job of grappling with the sort of complicated history of, for example, the North Vietnamese government's history with the Hmong population. Okay, that's museums. But the other type of sort of major cultural site you're going to see throughout Hanoi are a series of sort of temples and other religious sites. And I would say these are beautiful on their own, right? These are really cool and you might want to go check one out. But the sort of major life hack of Hanoi is knowing where these places are when you're overwhelmed and knowing that I just need a break, right? Like it's scooters 24 hours a day, it's horns 24 hours a day, it's 110 degrees, it's humid, it smells like sort of exhaust and cooking and agriculture and all kinds of other things. I need like an hour of quiet. And the amazing thing is throughout the city, there are these beautiful temples that you can go into and just sit down and pull out your book or pull out your paints or just sit there and reflect a little bit. And as soon as you're sort of behind the walls and behind the trees, the city all fades away and you've got a nice quiet place to just relax, take a moment, and then you can sort of get back into the fray. And so I'm not going to call your attention to any particular temple like this, because I think part of the fun of Hanoi is you stumble across these all the time. You stumble across sites like this and you say, that looks super beautiful. I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to go in. You take that sort of step in, everyone seems cool with this. All right, cool. I'm going to go just find a bench under a tree and just chill out for a little bit. So these are both in the city. Yeah. But I want to come back to just being out on the street. I think if you ask folks in the US about Hanoi, you might hear that you might get told that folks in the north or folks in Hanoi are sort of cold. They're not very friendly. They're not very welcoming. And maybe there's some truth to that. I think after a couple visits, my main takeaway is that you're usually hearing that from people who have some sort of either personal connection or family connection to South Vietnam. They very likely may have left South Vietnam during the war. And that sort of idea that the northern folks are sort of cold and unwelcoming comes out of that era. I certainly haven't found that to be the case. I think this is one of the most friendly and inviting places that I've been, because you can just be out on the street. These are, from a couple different evenings of wandering the streets at night and seeing what's going on. Why is it happening at night? Because it's stupid hot during the day. And you don't want to be out, jumping the sticks. So they bounce the sticks up and down. And then I'm sure there's a good name for that activity, but it's much harder than it looks. You don't want to be doing that during the day in the beating sun of sort of 0 degrees latitude and 100% humidity. You want to do it in the evening when it cools off. And so you see everyone's out. This is not like a special holiday. I don't even think this is like a weekday or a weekend. This is just like a normal, Thursday night. Everyone's out after dinner, enjoying some time in the cool air. You notice on the right here, all these kids on hoverboards. The streets have been shut down. There's no traffic, and they're just out having a good time. And there's food stalls, and there's people selling stuff, and there's theater performances and music performances, and that's sort of year-round, every night. That is the sort of the fun of Hanoi, and you are welcome to participate. You're going to be invited in fact, if you even look halfway interested, because it's fun to watch goofy people like me try and jump up and down on the moving sticks. So, Empirical slides, doesn't want to change. All right, and quickly, the food. I don't want to be too judgy, but honestly, I do want to be too judgy. If you're spending time in Hanoi and you're eating in a restaurant like where you made a reservation and someone brought you to a table, you've done something wrong. You should be eating sort of every meal on the street. You should be eating it from a street food vendor or from a little stall. Often it's sort of maybe a 5x10 nook where they're doing the cooking, and then the seats are all sprawled out to the road in front. I mean, of course, everything is ultra affordable and ultra fresh because, of course, there's not a lot of refrigeration. So they're going to the market in the morning and getting the stuff they're going to cook that day and then cooking and serving it to you. You can see here, this is a sort of, this isn't pho, it's a different type of soup made with beef heart. In the middle, you can see we're having some breakfast banh mi, which is an invention that still has not really made its way to the US, but I would desperately love it. It's sort of, a banh mi, except it's still some pate, but then with like scrambled egg and chilies and all kinds of other delicious herbs and things. This was actually made by this lady in the background. She just, carries her whole banh mi making setup on her shoulder, walks around. If you want one, she sits down and makes you a sandwich and hands it to you. And on the right here, one of the things you'll see, depending on the time of year you go, is that the food scene changes dramatically throughout the year. We were there in January of 2017, which is technically winter. It's still winter like at the equator, which meant it was like in the 80s, but everyone started wearing puffy coats because 80 is cold in Hanoi. And it also meant that the food changed. The food changed to warm weather or cold weather food. And so you get a lot more stuff like this sort of hot pot, which is there's a burner underneath and it's a whole bunch of sort of broth and you're cooking things in it. And the idea is it's, putting off a lot of heat right at your table and you're enjoying that. And I had also been there in sort of June of 2013, and I never saw this kind of dish once, right? And I'm sure it's around, but again, when it's 110 degrees and 100% humidity, having someone bring a literal burning hot bowl to your table and sit in front of a flame for a while was a little less endearing and exciting. Here's a photo of me just picking up some snacks. You'll notice again, like literally just standing in the street, getting some food. And then on the right, you can see, dinner is wandering around, just waiting to be turned into dinner. And you'll see the typical plastic stool, because we all know that the best food in the world is always eaten on a low plastic stool. Lastly, in the city proper, I'd say, it's a city of 8 million people. It's a big place. There's stuff for everyone. So if you're super into textiles, there's literally like multiple sort of massive mall type structures that are just textiles. And on the left, you see Kat wandering off into one of them. We did eventually find her and get her back out. And if you're me, you want to go climbing, there's an awesome climbing gym with a really cool community. And they actually, during COVID, they lost this space, but actually were able to crowdfund to build a new space. And it's very exciting. So if you're a climber and you get to Hanoi, go to Viet Climb. Really, really cool place. So Hanoi is also a great jumping off point for a ton of sort of more nature-y experiences in northern Vietnam. And so this first set of photos, this is from Ha Long Bay. So Ha Long Bay is on the ocean. It's a couple hours drive from the city, and it is this sort of bay of thousands of these limestone karst islands, and they are riddled with caves. And so I'd say the general sort of activity that you would do if you're a tourist and you just want to get an experience of this is you're going to go to Ha Long Bay, or you're going to go to Hai Phong, which is the city on Ha Long Bay. You're going to get into a boat like this, a sort of mini cruise ship that's going to have food and a deck where you can hang out and a cabin for you to sleep in. And it's going to take you on a little tour around the bay for 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever you're interested in. And you'll probably stop off and do some hiking on some islands, tour some caves. There are a lot of pearl farming operations in the bay, and so you might stop off and have the opportunity to buy some pearls. And otherwise, if you're not interested in any of those things, you can just bring your Kindle or your book and sit on the top deck and just sort of watch as you drift in and out of these coves and among these islands. Obviously, some absolutely stunning sunsets and sunrises. And there's also a ton of adventure sport type things there. And so you can see on the right, cat paddling a kayak. That's a pretty common thing as part of any of these tours, just going out on a kayak and exploring. There's also some amazing climbing on these islands, including doing deep water solo, if that's your thing, just climbing without ropes and falling into the ocean when you fall off. And lots of other great hiking and even more sort of extreme sporty type stuff, if you're interested in that sort of thing. And getting to Halon Bay and doing one of these trips, it can be really easy. If you're staying in a hotel, you're sort of guaranteed that they're going to have a book of all of the different tours they can help you organize. And the way it would work is, a van comes to your hotel pretty early in the morning, takes you out to a parking lot and loads you onto a larger bus. You ride out to the coast, you get onto one of these boats, you sail around for a while, they bring you home at the end. And it's going to be a super touristy experience. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for you to, buy handicrafts from quote unquote artisans and things. And I think as long as you go into it with your eyes open to that experience and you say, well, those are the types of activities that subsidize a really low cost opportunity to get out on the bay and enjoy nature. And you just sort of tune out some of the consumerism. That can be a really great way to do it. If you're the type of person who just absolutely bristles at that sort of thing and you just never want to do a group tour, I'm never going to be that person. It's also very doable to do on your own. You can go to the main bus terminal in Hanoi, catch a city bus or a regional bus out to Haiphong, and then you can either just negotiate passage on a boat yourself, or you can actually take another sort of shuttle boat out to the bigger island in the bay, Katba Island. And from there, there's lots of sort of action sport operators and things if you just want to go out and spend a day kayaking or that sort of thing as well. So either option's fine, but definitely if you're going to go to Hanoi, I think a trip to Halon Bay is sort of a must. All kinds of other activities though. This is from a trip to a place called the Perfume Pagoda, which is another sort of van to a bus to a boat to a bus to some hiking that gets you up and up and up and up along all of these sort of temples and then into an entire cave system that's been built out as a series of temples as well. So another just a day trip. And you can also do things like agricultural stays if you'd like to go and experience living on a rural farm for 24 hours or 48 hours. Very popular activity in the north as well as you get into more of the mountains and the farming area. So that's a quick idea of some things you can do in Hanoi, why it might be fun. But honestly, I would say, a trip to Hanoi should be basically, I'm going to spend 5 days in Hanoi. I know I'm going to do 1 day in Halon Bay, and otherwise I'll figure it out when I get there. Like that's the approach you should take in planning a trip to Hanoi. So how would you go about planning a trip to Hanoi, you ask? Some quick logistics. It's really far away. It's not actually like halfway around the world, but it's near as makes no difference. And you're not going to get there on a direct flight. We'll see sort of as we emerge from COVID, there may be some direct flights coming out of the West Coast relatively soon, but as of today, I don't believe there's any way to fly direct from anywhere in the US to Hanoi. So you're going to be doing transit. You're going to be doing at least one connection somewhere in Asia. And so the most common places, especially if you're coming out of Minneapolis, but the most common places you'd be connecting would probably be Tokyo or Seoul. Rarely are you actually going to connect in KL, but KL is such a cool city that maybe you just take a slight diversion. Hong Kong pre-COVID was also a very common connection, but airline transit through Hong Kong is kind of a mess right now. And it's not exactly clear whether that's going to resume in the same way. So chances are for now, especially coming from the Midwest, you're probably going to connect in Tokyo or Seoul. I would say right now, I'm also seeing a lot of routes that would take you through, Amsterdam, going the sort of longer way around. Or for those of you who are on the East Coast, where you've got access to some of the Emirati airlines, so the UAE airlines that would connect you in like Dubai, for example, that's another option as well. Either way, I would say, think about whether you want to bake in a layover on one of these, especially if you're transiting in Tokyo or Seoul or something where you're, going to have an opportunity to spend a day or two in one of these cities. I'd always recommend doing a layover like that on your return rather than on your outbound, because you're at least somewhat acclimated to time zone and climate. And it's not going to be fun to try and navigate Seoul on, 12 hours of jet lag after an 18-hour flight. When you're coming from, Minnesota winter into, Asian heat. But definitely worth taking a look at. Seoul in particular, actually, just a quick life hack. The Seoul airport has a really cool layover opportunity where they have free tours out of the airport, and they're 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, or 8 hours, depending on how much time you've got. And you just go and you walk up to the booth when you get to the airport and say, I've got 4 hours till my flight. They'll say, cool, there's a tour leaving. We're going to take you to, a couple cool sites. We'll take you to a food market, and then we'll bring you back and make sure you're back at the airport in time for your flight. And we know what that is because we are the airport. And so there's just no question. And then they take care of storing your luggage and everything as well, totally free. So, if you get a chance to transit in Seoul, definitely worth taking a look. When you're in Vietnam as well, of course, you've flown all that way. There are a few other places you're probably going to want to take a look at. There's, of course, Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon in the south. Some people absolutely love Ho Chi Minh City. I don't really. It's, for some fairly obvious reasons, it's a fairly modern city. And so it feels a lot more Western. It's, I guess, just not as exciting to me. In the middle of the country, though, as we go north to south, you've got a number of opportunities. You've got sort of Hue, which is the ancient capital city and the scene of some pretty intense fighting during the war. You've got Hoi An, which is a really sort of beautiful city on the coast. Previously a hotbed for Russian oligarchs to hang out. I don't know what Hoi An is going to be like in the future, but another awesome site. And all of these you'd reach by flying around. You're going to fly from Hanoi to Da Nang and take a cab out to Hoi An, and then take another flight down to Ho Chi Minh City, for example. So I'd strongly recommend that. There are buses, intercity buses and trains, but they're slow, and the regional flights are so cheap that flying is just the way to go to move around within Vietnam. And just do plan to practice some hashtag self-care, remembering that it's a really big time difference. There's sort of no cheating the jet lag when it's a 13-hour difference. You're just gonna take some time, and so you need to be willing to take some breaks throughout your days. And again, if you're coming from Minnesota, it's very possible that you're facing a 100-degree temperature difference, and your body's gonna take a little time to adapt to that. If you're someone with breathing problems as well, you may want to make sure you're prepped with some extra meds, whatever works for you, because you're going to be facing this sort of intense humidity and generally quite a bit more sort of particulate pollution in the air. So that can be a little bit intense for folks as well. I've stayed in both Airbnbs and hotels in Hanoi. I would say generally, there used to be this idea that real travelers always stayed in Airbnbs because we want to live like a local, blah, 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 blah. But frankly, if you're spending a lot of time in your hotel room or your Airbnb in Hanoi, you're doing something wrong. So honestly, if you can stay in a cool boutique hotel and get the advantage of like an awesome front desk that can help you arrange those tours, that can, help you with some of those logistics, maybe arrange an airport transfer for you, I'd say go for it. That scene has changed a lot in I've been there over the last, 8-9 years. I've certainly seen the sort of rise of the more boutique Instagrammy hotels. And I think honestly, like that's probably the way to go in Hanoi. And keep in mind as well, if you know that you're the kind of person who really needs a quiet place to cut off from the world, you want to be able to sleep with real silence and good air conditioning. There's a lot of great hotels for that as well, both in that city core and then out as a little further as well. So if you want to stay at a Sofitel or a Hilton or whatever, you can do that as well. Finally, just a few other things. Language. You probably don't speak Vietnamese, and you're probably not going to learn a ton in your run up to the trip. But as always, learning a handful of words, learning hello and thank you, and how to do a little bit of basic food ordering, or say it was the food was delicious, those sorts of things. You're always going to benefit from that, but you'll get by. Google Translate is amazing, and folks are super generous and super excited to try and help you. I've never had the language barrier be a problem there. You can get around really easily if you're not up for walking or you don't want to walk all the time. Grab is now the sort of main go-to ride sharing service, the sort of Uber alternative. Uber's pulled out of that region, but that's another easy app to install. The great thing about those types of apps is that, again, you don't need to speak the language. You can pull out your phone no matter where you are and say, I want to get back to my hotel, and a car will come and pick you up and get you back to your hotel. So that's a great sort of lifeline safety net for you if you're a little uncomfortable with some of the navigation. I would also say, I know that there is a Instagram thing about going and either renting bicycles in Vietnam, or thanks to a Top Gear episode from years and years ago, renting scooters in Vietnam. Don't do that. Just like, especially if you don't like routinely ride a scooter back home, don't learn to ride a scooter in Hanoi traffic. It's going to end badly. So please don't do that. Money, there's still a lot of cash used on the street, although just at the tail end of 2021, there's started to be a big push for sort of digital payments using the sort of QR code style app experience, the sort of like WeChat in China. They've explicitly prohibited the Chinese companies, and so there's some homegrown solutions and some other regional solutions playing there, but there's still a lot of cash in use as well. Everything's very affordable as well. And lastly, phones. I only mention this because if you look at any guidebooks, you might see folks saying that your phone won't work in Vietnam, because until recently, Hanoi, or Vietnam in general, was, along with North Korea and only a couple other countries, one of the few places that hadn't agreed to any sort of global roaming agreement. And so if you landed and pulled out your T-Mobile or AT&T phone and turned it on, it just wouldn't work. You had to get a SIM card, and it was a whole faff. No longer true. Your phone will work fine there. In the newsletter this month, talked a little bit about why I think you should just use your phone and not worry about it. So with that, I'm going to see if there's any questions posted in the question and answer. And oops, do that. Edward had some good questions about the language. I think I covered that. I was going to also mention, if you happen to have any experience speaking Chinese, which I only kind of have in the past, and certainly not in any serious way, but there's enough similarities there that I also felt like that was a nice little leg up in communicating in Vietnamese. If you've already gone to the trouble of learning a few basic words in Chinese, you'll probably have an easier time getting up to speed in Vietnamese as well. Certainly in Hai Lan Bay, it is super calm water, and you can do a single kayak, double kayak, and all kinds of other boats depending on what your comfort level is. So Edward was wondering how comfortable it would be to be out there kayaking. It's a very, very protected bay because of all of the islands there. And yeah, with that, I'll say next month, our webinar is going to be on Southwest England, sort of the polar opposite of Hanoi. But we're talking about Southwest England, an area that a lot of people from the States coming to England or the UK don't tend to visit. And so we'll be talking about why you might want to go check out Southwest England. That's on April 19th. But if you want to know about all of this stuff, you can sign up for the monthly newsletter. It's one email a month that comes out the first Friday of the month at whyshouldIvisit.com. Click on newsletter and sign up, and you get some travel thoughts, you get info about the webinar, and some travel tip stuff. So made it through right about on time. Oh, Anna asks, have I done deep water solo? No, because it turns out to do deep water solo, the tide needs to be right. And I didn't know that the first time I went. I went fully expecting to do deep water solo, and I got there and the climbers were all like, oh my God, you're gonna die, because the tide is low, and whatever, the moon and the things. So you need to have the tide in such a place that the water is high enough that when you fall off of the rocks, you don't smash into the rocks under the water. So I would very much like to do that someday, though. Although I've always thought that like then having wet shoes for the rest of the day would be not that great. So yeah. Anyways, thank you all for coming, and I hope this was somewhat interesting. And if not, you didn't have to like pretend to be excited like you do at work Zoom calls. So at least it had that going for it. Thanks. Bye.